Hi everyone and welcome to an episode in Game Art. In this episode we're taking a look at lighting and how it's handled in Unreal Engine 4 as well as in generally just in games. Now in games, lighting is mostly fake, but 80% of it is not actually there. That's because it's baked onto the textures during the creation process and not at runtime. So what is baking? Well, baking is when we take light and shadow data from a lighting and put it and paint it onto a texture. So these shadows you see here on the ground aren't really there. They have been baked and painted onto the texture. And I can demonstrate that if I move this block out of the way, you see the shadow is still remaining. We now get this error message telling us that we need to rebuild our lighting. That's because it's noticed that something's moved and therefore detected that we need to update that lighting information. Now there are three settings we can set a light. It can be static, stationary or movable. And these options are over here on the right hand side details panel. So if I click on this point light over here, this is our stationary point light and it's the default setting for pretty much all your lights that you use in the engine. A stationary light allows you to change its various settings in the light color and its intensity. It will still bake the shadows and it can't be moved, but it allows you to tweak various settings that you most likely can be using inside the engine, which is mostly the color and intensity. Now importantly, it also affects the casting of shadows of movable objects. So if you want the player character to still generate a shadow from a fake light source, this stationary option will allow you to do that. Conversely, you have static. Now static objects can't do that. And notice when I turn it back to static, it still needs to rebuild the lighting. That's because it's going to bake everything onto textures and make it completely wholly texture based. Okay, so it won't cast any extra shadows, it'll be just there static in the world for everyone to see. So these two options allow us to be really powerfully, really efficient with our rendering. Especially the static. The static setting is probably the most efficient way of handling the rendering of lights. But you are limited in the fact that it can't cast shadows and you can't change nothing about it. So if you want a good in-between, stationary is very powerful, because it does allow that casting of shadows and you still can change the light's intensity and its colour. The other option we have is movable. And movable basically means that light is going to be moving around the environment and therefore it cannot be baked into the world. Now these are the most expensive and slowest to render lights. So it's a good idea to only have one of these at most in your level if you can help it. And these are usually reserved for the player character holding a light source. That could be a torch, it could be a headlamp, it could be whatever it may be, but it's usually held by the player or enemy sometimes. But we try and limit as much of that as possible because again it is very costly, so you want to make sure you're only using one if you can help it. And that's a movable light. So using these three settings, we can customize how a game is rendering its light and be really efficient with the way we set up its shading. So one thing to note with stationary is that stationary lights are baked on a different sort of system. So they're not baked directly onto the texture, they're baked in sort of semi-separate light maps. And what that means is that you have limitations with them, meaning that you cannot overlap any more than 3 at a time. So here's 3. If I go to add another one, you can see I've got a cross on it. That means that this one is not going to be used. So if it's overlapping those 3, it get a cross. As soon as I move it away from those 3, outside of their bounds, you can see the cross has disappeared. So stationary lights have their limitation in the fact that you can only have 3 overlapping at any one time. So to demonstrate further features, I'm going to make this scene night. In the night mode, we can have a look at how shadows are actually cast inside the static, stationary and movable lights. So I've got this pushable block here, and in the static light, this first light here, you'll notice the block doesn't cast any shadow whatsoever. But watch as I move it closer towards the stationary light. You'll notice the shadow is now being cast. And this continues to be true as it moves into the movable light as well. So if you need a light to cast a shadow, such as this, it needs to be either stationary or movable. So let's push it underneath the movable light. And you can see the light being cast by the movable light there. And there you have it. There's a difference between static, stationary and movable lights, and also how lighting works in general when it comes to game engines. If you have any questions regarding lighting, please leave a comment below and I'll get back to them as soon as I can. Meanwhile, please consider supporting me on patreon.com/RyanLady, just like everyone else here on the screen has done. Big shout out and thank you to all of you for supporting me on this journey and making this channel the best it can be. So thanks once again, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.